Dalet of Aleph at the Mishnah, 44a at the Mishnah. Okay, first half of the Gemara is the Gemara will go through, the Mishnah will go through the three prohibitions of Nazir and sort of compare and contrast the three of them to understand what the differences are, why they're different, and what the source is. And it's sort of a lengthy Gemara because the Gemara does it in, obviously, its unique way, but that would be the order. Okay, Shleisha Minim Asurim ben Nazir. There are three prohibitions of Nazir, and they are Hatuma, becoming impure, V'hatagalachas, cutting his hair, V'hayotzim and a geffen, and consuming something that leaves a vine. Okay, so the Gemara goes through each one individually. Chaymer b'tuma u'b'tagalachas mi'b'yotzim min hageffen. Tuma and shaving and cutting your hair is, in a certain sense, more stricter than eating from the vine, eating a grape or grape product. If a Nazir violates the laws of Naziris by drinking wine, so he gets malchus for drinking wine, but his Nazir status remains unchanged. However, if somebody becomes tamei, he loses his Nazir's count. He has to restart the count. Mm-hmm. And similarly, if somebody cuts his hair, he has to have at least 30 days worth of growth. So he loses 30 days worth. 30 days of his Nazir's are lost because he has to grow his hair again for 30 days before he ends his Nazir's. Okay. However, there is a stringency that drinking wine has, or any grape product, over tuma and cutting your hair. Why? Because something that leaves a vine, there is never any permission to do it. Meaning, even though there is a mitzvah, let's say, to make kiddush on a glass of wine, a nazir is not allowed to make kiddush on a glass of wine, or any mitzvah for that matter. However, with regard to tuma and tegalachas, if a nazir sees a mace mitzvah, a dead person who has no one, and there's no one to bury him, he's obligated to bury him, even though he will lose his naziris. So we see here that this is an out for a nazir. He buries a mace mitzvah. Another out is if he becomes a mitzvah and he needs to cut his hair because he's a mitzvah. So then he's allowed to cut his hair, like we saw yesterday. Rabbi,
a question. You said that Tuma Mace is a way out. Is he permanently out?
No. It's not a way out. It's a way to. There is a permissible violation of the prohibition to become tummy.
I see.
And obviously, if he becomes tamei to a mace mitzvah, he has to follow the complete rectification procedure to bring his karbanos and the whole thing, count again, new naziris. But if he comes to a rabbi and says, "I have a mace mitzvah, what should I do?" The rabbi says, "Go become tamei," because that's what you're obligated to do. Okay. If he has to cut his hair because he's a mitzvah, or with mace mitzvah if he finds a body that nobody is burying. Similarly, the chaymer b'tuma mib'tagalachas. Tuma, in a certain sense, is the most severe. Why? It's more severe than cutting your hair. Tuma is a seres zakol. Chayavan alai korban. If a person becomes tamei, he loses all of his naziris and he has to bring a korban. However, the tagalachas ain't necessaris el shleishim. Cutting his hair, he only loses 30 days. So ain't chayav alai korban, and you're not chayav to bring a korban. Ask the Gemara. Okay, so now the Gemara tries to basically prove all these points and try to prove how maybe things would be a little bit different than the Mishnah. The Gemara obviously resolves exactly what we saw in the Mishnah. So we'll go through. The tumal tuter mechlala kal v'chaymer miyayin. We should say that a nazir is not allowed to become tamei to a mace mitzvah. Why is that? We should say it's a kal v'chaymer from the prohibition of drinking wine. Ma yayin, just like the prohibition of drinking wine, she'enei seiser, that even though he violates the prohibition, he doesn't have to recount his naziris. Lo hoter mechlalai. We say that there's never any permission to drink wine, even if you have a mitzvah. You're not allowed to drink wine. Too much is seres. Meaning if the lenient one, right, is strict enough that we never allow any permission. The lenient one, meaning drinking wine, it's lenient because it's not seiser, you don't lose the count. And yet we still say that when it comes to a mitzvah of drinking wine, he's not allowed to drink wine. We should say a tumah that is seiser, tumah that's so much more severe, certainly should not have the leniency of being permitted in the case of meis mitzvah. Just like wine drinking is not permitted, and wine drinking is more lenient than this stricter category should not have the leniency of the lenient category. Just like the lenient category doesn't have the leniency, the stricter category certainly shouldn't have the leniency. So the Gemara says, the Torah gives examples of the prohibition to become tamei. Who is it? A father or a mother. Specifically to his father and his mother, he shouldn't become tamei. And that's the example, meaning to a relative. But this indicates to us that to a meis mitzvah, the deceased body that no one's willing to bury, he is allowed to become tamei to. Okay, if that's the case, so now that we know this, let's say the opposite now. Let's say that we should permit wine in the case of mitzvah. Just like tumah, tumah destroys the count of Nazir, so you have to restart the count. We still say that in a case of meis mitzvah, it's permitted. When there's a mitzvah, it's permitted. Yayin she'eina seiser, wine that's more lenient. Eina din she'yutar. One second. Eina din she'yutar mechlala. It would seem reasonable to presume that it should be permitted in a case of mitzvah. So the Gemara says, from wine and from old wine, Yazir, he will prohibit himself. And this tells us, less or yayin mitzvah ki yayin rishos, that wine of a mitzvah, meaning a kiddush or something similar, is just like a regular glass of wine, and a nazir is prohibited in both. Okay, so Gemara says, now that we know that, so let's say the other way. The yayin yister asakol kal v'chaymer mitumah. Let's say that yayin should cause the nazir to lose his count of naziros. Learning from tumah, ma tumah shehutra mechlala. Sesaras sakol. When we find that tumah has the leniency that you're permitted to become tamei in a case of meis mitzvah. Yet when you become tamei, you lose the count. Yayin, wine that's more stringent, shaloi hoter mechlali, that it is not permitted in a case of wine of mitzvah. So we certainly should give it this other stringent. In other words, wine is much more stringent. If that's the case, give it the other stringency and say it should be yister sakol. If somebody drinks wine, he should lose his nazir count. Like yister, it certainly would appear that he should lose his. He should destroy the days that he's already counted. So the Gemara says, "Amakra b'yom harishon yiblu kitamei nizri." The first days are lost, ki tamei nizra, because his naziris became tamei. And what does that tell you? It tells you, when do you lose the first days? Tumah seiseres, ve'ein yayin seiser. Tumah destroys days of naziris, but wine does not. Okay, now we go to cutting here. V'tagalachas, the prohibition for nazir to cut his hair. Tister as a koil, you should lose the entire count. Kal v'chaymer mitumah, learning from tumah. Umat tumah sheli osava mitame kimitmo sesaras sakol tagalachas sheosava. We'll explain this in a moment. Explain it now. Okay. Nazir has an interesting din by Nazir. Let's say you go ahead, a barber goes ahead and cuts a Nazir's hair. He shaves a Nazir hair with a machine or without a machine. Doesn't make a difference. The halacha is that both the barber and the nazir, if he was voluntarily sitting in the chair, both of them get malchus. However, in a case where somebody comes with a deceased body in a beer or a casket, and he pushes it onto the nazir, so if the nazir, voluntarily obliged, then the nazir gets malchus. The guy who made him tamei does not get malchus. And if the Nazir is locked in a chair and the guy pushes the casket on him, no malchus at all. Nazir in this case is an Einus. The guy who made him Tamei does not have a prohibition. So that's a clear example of stringency of cutting hair. But cutting hair, and the Gemara will soon explain. The Gemara now takes for granted. Soon the Gemara will explain what the actual source is. Why is it like that? What's unique about cutting hair, and why is it different than making a Nazir Tamei? If you make a Nazir Tamei, you do not get malchus for doing that. Okay.
The barber have to know it's a Nazir?
Presumably. Otherwise, he wouldn't, he's a sheikh. He thinks what he's doing is permitted. Okay. By Tuma, we say that the person who makes him Tamei is not like the person who becomes Tamei. The Nazir who becomes Tamei violates the commandment, the prohibition, but the person who makes him Tamei does not violate it. And yet we say, we say that Tuma causes you to lose the count. Tagalachas, cutting hair, that we say the one who gives the haircut is just as guilty as the one who gets the haircut. It should be the case that he should also lose the count. So the Gemara says, obviously that can't be, because we already said, why does Tuma cause you to lose the count? Only Tuma causes you to lose the count. And that's exactly what the pasuk says. Nothing else can cause you to lose the count. Okay, fine. So now that I know that, if that's the case, then let's say that by Tuma, the guy who makes him Tamei should be like the one who becomes Tamei. In other words, they both should be prohibited. Let's learn it from cutting here. You see by tagalachas, which is more lenient, because when somebody cuts his hair, he only loses 30 days. Yet we still say that the megaleach, the barber, and the guy in the chair have the same halacha. The Nazir and the barber are both prohibited. So Tuma, that's more stringent. She says Saras Sakal. Tuma, that's more stringent. You lose all the days in Naziris. Ein adin shenasma mitame commitma. It certainly should be in the same category of equating the one who makes the Nazir Tamei like the Nazir who becomes Tamei. They both should be prohibited. The Gemara says, Amakra v'timei rosh nizrei. The mitame rosh nizrei. What does this mean? The timei rosh nizrei means when the Torah talks about the Nazir becoming Tamei, it talks about the Nazir making himself Tamei. And that tells me that the Nazir is the only one who becomes Tamei. We'll soon see in a moment, but when the Torah talks about a Nazir having his hair cut, the Torah says it as sort of a third party happening. So it says, a razor should not go on his head. Doesn't relate it to the Nazir. Doesn't say the Nazir shouldn't cut his hair. It says a razor shouldn't go on his hair. Sort of, it's like a third party. Anyone who's involved in putting a razor into his head, it doesn't mean a razor, as you said before. Okay, machlekes, whatever. The way the Mishnah learned and the Tanakh and the way halacha is that Nazir's not allowed to cut his hair. It doesn't make a difference what it is, whether he's using a razor or scissors, haircut machine wouldn't make a difference. But the idea here is because the Torah, when the Torah phrases a Nazir becoming Tamei, the Torah says the Nazir is going to make himself Tamei. Obviously not. First of all, I'm saying sometimes he will and sometimes he won't. But the fact that it's phrased that way tells me that it's the Nazir's responsibility to avoid Tumah. And it's not anybody else's responsibility to avoid making him Tamei. But because when it comes to cutting hair, the Torah says as if a razor shouldn't go on his hair, doesn't attribute responsibility to that. Therefore, the megaleach, the barber, and the Nazir are in the same category. Okay. Where are we? Okay. So now the Gemara goes the other way. So now we'll see. Okay. Therefore, so now we know that a Nazir, the mitame, is not like the one who makes Tumah is not like the Nazir who becomes Tamei. They're different. Okay. Now that I know this, let me say that by somebody cutting his hair, the barber should not be the same as the Nazir. The barber should be exempt. Let's compare it to Tumah. Just like Tumah, that you do not lose the count. I'm sorry. Ma Tumah that she says Saras Akal, you completely lose the count of Naziris. We do not say the person becoming tumah, making tumah, is like the Nazir becoming tumah. Tagalachas, cutting here, she'enes aseres ela shloshim yom, where you only lose 30 days. Like in other words, if we're not lenient in the stricter scenario, we certainly shouldn't be lenient in the more lenient situation. 1 second, hold on, it doesn't make sense. Why shouldn't you? It doesn't make sense. 1 second. Hold on. No, it's not.
Page position, please, Rabbi.
It's 6 lines in the bottom of the page. First word line is Rosh. I'm sorry, is Yom. It's as follows. We shouldn't be strict. In other words, if the strict category, we aren't strict on the one who makes tumah. Why is tumah strict? Because tumah you lose the complete count. We're still not strict on the one who makes and tumah. So therefore, in the lenient category, we shouldn't be strict on that fellow either. In other words, on cutting here, which you do not lose your whole of zeros, you only lose 30 days. We shouldn't either be strict and say that the barber is just as culpable as an Nazir. The Kollel where it says Amakro tar leyaver aroishi kari be. 1 second. Tar leyaver aroishi kari be leyaver hu v'leyaver la'acher. It says a razor shouldn't go on his head, whether it's him or whether it's somebody else. Okay. Another question. We should tagalachas be said of mitzvah. If a mitzvah needs to cut his hair and he's a mitzvah and he's an nazir, he cuts his hair. So the Gemara says, let's not permit him to cut his hair from a kal v'chomer. What's kal v'chomer? Kal v'chomer migayin, comparing it to wine. Umayin she'ein esayser leihut mechlolai. Wine that does not cause you to lose the Nazir's count. We don't permit you to drink wine because of a mitzvah. Tagalachas, it's more stringent. Certainly, we should not permit it in a case of mitzvah. In other words, if the lenient category, right, which is drinking wine, is not permitted for a mitzvah, the stringent category should neither be permitted for a mitzvah. So Gemara says, Amakra Roshai, that with the conclusion of his Naziris, he shaves his head. But Amar Chmana Ziknai, and the Torah says Ziknai, and this is, I'm sorry, Rosh and Ziknai is with regard to Mitzvah. Torah says Mitzvah cuts his head. And that tells me that he does so even if he's an Nazir. Because the Torah says he cut all his hair. So why did the Torah mention the head, mention Roshai or Ziknai? Tell me that a Mitzvah who's a Nazir cuts his hair as well. Okay, now that we know that is true for Mitzvah, Tagalachas letister klal, we should say that cutting hair is not, if he cuts his hair, he doesn't lose any days of his Naziris. Kal v'chomer miyayin, let's compare it to wine. Umayin shleichut mechlolei. Ein asayser, wine that does not have the leniency in a case of mitzvah. Ein asayser doesn't cause you to lose days. So wine in a certain sense is more stringent. It isn't saiser. Tagalachas shehotcher mechlolei, tagalachas which is more lenient. And in shleitister, it would make sense that it shouldn't make you lose the count either. You shouldn't lose 30 days of your Naziris. So Gemara says, no, the reason why you lose 30 days is a technical problem, because you have to cut your hair at the end of the 30 days. And be'in on gidol sar v'haleka. The only way to do that is to have at least 30 days of growth, because the rabbis understood that that's the minimum amount of growth required for the mitzvah. Okay. So the Gemara says, v'yayin yis t'shloshim yom. Let's say that wine should cause him to lose 30 days of his count. Let's compare it to cutting hair. Just like shaving his head. It has the leniencies of being permitted in the case of mitzvah. Seseres, it causes you to lose 30 days. So it's more, despite the fact that it's more lenient, it still causes you to lose 30 days. So yayin, which is more stringent, yister shloshim yom, should certainly have a stringency of losing at least 30 days. I'm sorry. Yayin that does not have permission in the case of mitzvah, ein adin sheyister. Certainly, we're on the last line of 44a. Certainly, it should cause you to lose the Naziris. So the Gemara says, okay, hold on a second. Why exactly does cutting hair cause you to lose 30 days? Because you need to have 30 days of growth. Because because you have to be able to grow your hair enough to be able to cut it. So that sort of technical problem doesn't relate to drinking wine. And therefore, his hair is standing, so there's no problem. All right, let's continue. Okay, tagalachas tuma ketzad. When somebody becomes tamei, at the end of it, part of the purification process is that he has to cut his hair before he restarts his naziris. So how does that work? Now again, we're talking here about tamei mace. How does tamei mace work? Tamei mace lasts for 7 days. There's hazoya, there is a sprinkling of the ashes of the parah haduma, the red heifer, that happens on the 3rd and the 7th day. The 7th day he goes to the mikvah, and that evening he becomes tahar. When it was after sundown. Okay. So if somebody's a nazir and becoming tamei, same process. He's the ashes of the paradum are sprinkled on the 3rd and 7th day. And he cuts his hair on the 7th day. So he can cut his hair on the 7th day, even though he's still what we call tvul yom. Tvul yom is somebody who went to the mikvah but before sundown. See, in order to fully remove the tumah, you need mikvah plus sundown. So this guy he's allowed to cut his hair on the 7th day, but he can't bring his karbonos until he's tahar, and that only happens on the 8th, the 8th day after the 7th day after sunset. Okay, the mgilach b'shmini maybe karbonos of babiyan. Let's say he forgot to cut his hair on the 7th day. That's fine. He cuts his hair on the 8th day, and he brings the karbonos the same day. The crucial factor is that he be tahar, and that's why he brings the karbonos on the 8th day. Whether he cut his hair on the 7th or 8th day is not as imperative.
He loses his 7 days plus 30 days.
So in the case of where it's tumah, he loses everything, and he has to recount everything. So whether it's a standard 30 days naziris, or it could be a year naziris or 100 day naziris. Okay. Div Rabbi Kiva, this is the opinion of Rabbi Kiva. Reb Tarfon had a question. Ma bein zeh mitzara. What's the difference between this and a mitzara? A mitzara also cuts his hair. What's different about a mitzara is that mitzara, we're talking about here a mitzara muchlat. There's different levels of mitzara, but the most severe level is a guy who's kicked out of the city, so to speak. He lives outside the city until he loses his saras. Okay, a mitzara, it takes him 7 days to get over his tumah. He goes to the mikveh, becomes tahar. Then another day he has to cut his hair, and then the 9th day he brings his karbonos. So you see here that the cutting of the hair has to be done a day before the bringing of karbonos. So Rabbi Tarfon says that should be true with a nazir as well. If a nazir forgot to cut his hair on the 7th day, he only cut his hair on the 8th day, then he should bring his karbonos on the 9th day. So Amar Eloi, so Rabbi Kiva says to responds to Rabbi Tarfon, Zed taharose tluya biyamav u'mitzera taharose tluya b'tagalachtai. The rectification of the impurity of a nazir is not dependent on days. What it's dependent on is that he becomes tahar. And once he's tahar, you're ready to bring the karbonos. Tagalachas, cutting his hair, is just a minor step in between, but it's not ma'akev. It's not a step that needs its own day. Whereas by mitzvah, he needs to count seven days, plus he needs another day to cut his hair. Therefore, because the purification is not dependent on becoming tahar, therefore the karbonos are brought on the 9th day. And the mitzvah can only bring his karbonos after he's waited a day, waited till sundown following the day that he cut his hair. Okay, and the Gemara asks, Kibla minei Eloi. Did Reb Tarfon accept this response from Rabbi Kiva or not? So the Gemara says, Tashma, let's try to examine this. The Tani Hill taught, Gilach b'shmini, maybe karbonosav b'chi. The Gemara presumes that this is talking about Nazir, and the Hill taught that if he cuts his hair on the 8th day, he brings his karbonos on the 9th day. This clearly seems to be like Reb Tarfon. So apparently Reb Tarfon didn't change his mind. If you say that Reb Tarfon changed his mind, Lacy karbonos of Shmini, so then the karbonos should be brought on the 8th day. Rava says, Loikash, it's not difficult. This Bryce is not talking about cutting hair. The main question of the Bryce is when he is not when he cut his hair. It's when he went to the mikvah. If he went to the mikvah on the 8th day, or he went to the mikvah on the 9th day. If he went to the mikvah on the 8th, if he went to the mikvah on the 7th day or the 8th day. If he went to the mikvah on the 7th day, then he could bring his karbanis on the 8th day. But this Bryce is talking about we went to the mikvah on the 8th day, and therefore the karbanis need to be brought on the 9th day.